Fort Worth, 1971. A 21-month-old baby vanishes without a trace. No witnesses, no ransom, no clues. For 51 years, the case remained an absolute mystery until science stepped in. A simple DNA test revealed secrets time had tried to erase. A true story of loss, hope, and destiny that defies logic and moves the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and turn on notifications, because this story is only just beginning. Fort Worth, 1971. Alta Apantenko, a 21-year-old single mother, struggled to raise her daughter Melissa, a baby barely past her first birthday. She worked long hours at a small factory and, like so many working-class women of the time, faced the harsh reality of balancing work and motherhood without any real support network. Desperate for help, she decided to place an ad in the local newspaper looking for a babysitter who could care for Melissa while she worked. Jeffrey, the baby's father, didn't live with them but visited occasionally, trying to stay somewhat involved. The response came faster than expected. A well-dressed woman appeared, saying she was interested in the job. Alta believed she had finally found a solution, someone who could keep her daughter safe while she earned a living. But that meeting would mark the beginning of a tragedy that changed everything. The first moment in a mystery that would last more than half a century. It was a warm morning on August 23, 1971, in Fort Worth, Texas, when the phone rang once again in Alta Apantenko's small apartment. On the other end, a calm female voice introduced herself as Ruth Johnson. She had already called days earlier, saying she was interested in the babysitting position advertised in the newspaper, but she hadn't shown up for the first meeting. Alta hesitated, but necessity outweighed doubt. She was exhausted, overworked, and desperate for trustworthy help. She agreed to let the woman come over that morning. Around 9 o'clock, Ruth arrived. She wore a bonnet-style hat, a scarf around her neck, and white gloves, unusual details for the Texas heat, but perfect for concealing her face and hands. Alta's roommate, who watched Melissa while Alta worked, opened the door. The woman spoke softly, with a gentle tone that inspired confidence. She said she would take the little girl out to get something to eat and buy diapers. Seeing no reason to distrust her, the roommate handed over the baby along with her diaper bag and watched them walk out the door. The hours that followed dragged on in silence. When Alta returned from work, the crib was empty. No note, no message, no trace. Her roommate explained what had happened, and panic spread through the apartment. The police were called. But what could they do with so little to go on? Only a vague description. A respectable-looking woman, light hat, scarf, white gloves. No real name, no address, no witnesses. Within hours, the story of the missing baby Melissa spread through local newspapers. Posters reading "Missing" began appearing on street corners, while Alta's rotary phone sat silently, never ringing with the call that could bring her hope. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would span generations. A case seemingly destined to remain unsolved. The days that followed Melissa's disappearance were a blur of despair, tears, and unanswered questions. Fort Worth in 1971 had no security cameras, no digital records, no way to trace a single step of the woman calling herself Ruth Johnson. The police did what they could with what little they had, scribbled notes in notebooks, long phone calls, interviews relying solely on memory. The description was too vague: a polite woman, white gloves, scarf, hat, and investigators suspected those very clothes had been chosen to hide fingerprints, stray hairs, and any clue to her identity. The FBI was notified, and the case quickly gained statewide attention. No one reported seeing a woman with a small child. It was as if both had vanished into thin air. Alta's family was questioned, and Jeffrey, the father, was interrogated multiple times, but everyone was cleared of suspicion. The pain of loss mixed with the helplessness of a system limited by its time. With no new leads, Melissa's case was filed under missing persons. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Alta organized candlelight vigils, appeared on local TV programs, and pleaded for any information. But the phone remained silent, and Melissa's room stayed untouched, as if waiting for the impossible return. At the police station, case files piled up, and the maps dotted with red pins marking potential sightings began to fade. Hope still lingered, but the case was slowly going cold. In the 1980s and 1990s, The case of Melissa Highsmith was still remembered by those who had lived through the shock of 1971. Hope would resurface from time to time, fueled by new technologies and the growing involvement of organizations such as the NCHMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Using the few photos available from Melissa's infancy, experts created age progression images showing how she might look years later. These images appeared in newspapers and TV programs, but every new lead ended the same way. False alarms, families' confused faces, neighbors thought they recognized similarities, yet nothing ever matched. With the arrival of the 2000s, the search took on new life through the internet. A Facebook page titled "Finding Melissa Highsmith" was created by family members who refused to give up. There, amid emotional posts and old photographs, volunteers began to appear, amateur genealogists and so-called genia detectives, people using DNA databases to help solve cold cases. It became a race against time and against oblivion itself. The family, emotionally exhausted, still clung to small rituals of hope. Every year on Melissa's birthday, a single candle burned in the window, a silent symbol of faith. Alta grew old, carrying guilt and the aching void of not knowing her daughter's fate. The siblings grew up hearing the same sentence whispered through the years: "There is no closure without answers." The name Melissa was spoken again and again, year after year, like a prayer time could not erase. On November 22, 2022, everything changed. After decades of disappointment, the Highsmith family received an email from a genetic database. It was a DNA match notification, but not with Melissa herself. The system had found a connection to 3 young people identified as biological grandchildren of Jeffrey Highsmith, Melissa's father. At first, disbelief. How could there be biological grandchildren of a man whose daughter had been missing for more than 50 years? The news spread among the siblings like wildfire. Each of them read and reread the message, trying to understand what the algorithm was revealing. The data was sent to volunteer genealogist Lisa Jo Sheila, a specialist in solving cold cases through genetic tracing. She analyzed family trees, cross-referenced profiles, and studied the genetic distances between samples. Her conclusion was clear: the probability of error was virtually 0. Those 3 young people were direct descendants of Jeffrey Highsmith. That could mean only one thing: Melissa was alive somewhere, and she had built a life and family without ever knowing who she truly was. The air in the Highsmith home changed that day. After years of silence and disappointment, there was finally something solid. Not just hope, but proof. For the first time, Alta and her children felt they were standing on the threshold between mystery and revelation. It was Jeffrey who decided to take the first step. After confirming that the grandchildren were indeed part of the family, he searched Facebook for the name Melanie Walden. Among profiles and old photos, he sent a short, hesitant message, one that carried half a century of longing. "I think I'm your father." On the other side of the screen, Melanie read the words in disbelief. At first, she thought it was a mistake, maybe even a cruel joke. But her husband, curious, began to dig deeper. He found the Finding Melissa Highsmith page and started comparing the photos posted there with pictures of his wife. The resemblance was striking. The shape of the face, the eyes, even the tiny mark under her right eye. Overwhelmed by both doubt and hope, they agreed to take a DNA test through an independent laboratory. The result arrived days later. Cold, clinical, but emotionally overwhelming. 99.999% compatibility with Alta and Jeffrey Highsmith. There was no room for error. The woman who had grown up believing she was Melanie Walden was, in fact, Melissa Highsmith, the baby who had vanished in 1971. The scientific confirmation brought a heavy silence before the tears came. Alta, now in her 70s, finally had the words she had waited her entire life to say. Her daughter was alive. After 51 years, truth had triumphed where time had failed. On the morning of November 24, 2022, Thanksgiving Day, the Highsmith family gathered in Fort Worth for what felt like a dream. When Melissa, still adjusting to her real name, walked into the room, time seemed to stop. Alta, fragile and trembling, took a few unsteady steps toward the daughter she had not seen since 1971. The moment their hands touched, Alta broke into tears. "She's my baby." The hug that followed seemed to erase 51 years in an instant. Reporters captured the moment, and soon the story became national news. TV networks called it the DNA miracle, an incredible reunion that defied both fate and time. Alta, Jeffrey, Melissa, and the siblings who had never known her spent hours together, showing each other photographs and piecing together fragments of memory. For Melissa, each story revealed a truth she had never imagined. For Alta, every tear shed was a lifetime of pain finally released. That Thanksgiving, the Highsmith family was whole again, scarred but united, bound by love and the truth at last. In 2023, the final confirmation came. After reviewing documents, interviews, and genetic evidence, Fort Worth police officially closed the missing persons case, declaring that Melissa Highsmith had been found alive more than 50 years after her disappearance. Shortly afterward, in a simple but deeply symbolic court session in Tarrant County, Melissa legally reclaimed her name. The judge read the new record aloud, Melissa Highsmith, and the courtroom erupted into quiet applause and tears. It was the moment she finally regained an identity stolen by time. But with the reunion came painful memories. Melissa began to recall fragments of a childhood that now made sense in a very different way. The woman who had raised her claimed she had been born at home, with no formal birth certificate, and that her biological father had abandoned her. To justify years of isolation, she told Melissa she had a mild brain injury and needed protection. Melissa grew up under strict control, rarely allowed outside, never encouraged to make friends or ask questions. Punishments were common. Silence was expected. For years, she believed that world, small, quiet, and closed, was all there was. Now, surrounded by her real family, she began to rebuild herself through their stories, faces, and gestures. Each revelation brought both pain and healing, as if truth itself, no matter how hard, was giving her life back piece by piece. "I lived someone else's life. Now I have to learn my own." That's how Melissa described the months after the reunion. The discovery of truth unleashed a storm of emotions. Joy, shock, relief, and beneath it all, a quiet grief for the time that could never be recovered. Therapy became essential, session after session. She unpacked the weight of a half-century spent living under a false identity. Trust issues, fear of abandonment, and the constant feeling of displacement haunted her. It was as though she had to learn how to exist all over again. To rebuild her memories through the stories told by others, reconnecting with her 3 children was another delicate process. They had grown up believing in a version of their mother's past that no longer existed. Love was there, but so was confusion. Melissa struggled to balance the present with a past newly uncovered, holding on to her new family while mourning the years lost. Psychologists call it lived amnesia, when memories never form properly because life itself was built on a false story. Melissa realized she had not forgotten who she was. She had never been allowed to know. Between reconstructed memories and new discoveries, she began to step into her true self for the first time, finally aware of the life that was always meant to be hers. After finding Melissa, the Highsmith family turned their pain into purpose. What had once been silence and sorrow became a voice for other families still searching for their missing loved ones. Alta, Jeffrey, and their children began joining groups and conferences on genetic genealogy, helping others understand how DNA could lead to reunions once thought impossible. Never give up. Believe in science and in family, they would say, knowing that hope and technology together can achieve miracles. The case reignited national debates about the use of consumer genetic data in old investigations. Experts and organizations like the NCMEC discussed the delicate balance between privacy and the public good, searching for ethical solutions. The Highsmith story showed that, when handled responsibly, science can restore names, identities, and homes lost to time. Melissa, now fully aware of her true identity, often says the greatest lesson she learned was that the answer they had been searching for had always been there, just a few blocks away. In the end, DNA prevailed, but it took 51 years of faith, love, and persistence to make it possible. If this story touched you, share it. It might be the thread of hope another family needs to find their way home.